Welcome to METACO Talks. This is episode number 4 and the second episode for 2021. I'm Seamus Donoghue, the VP of Sales and Business Development at METACO. And METACO Talks is a bi-weekly topical discussion on cryptocurrencies and digital assets. Importantly, it's a live stream conversation. It's meant to be interactive. So if you're joined in the live session, please comment, ask questions, and we'll try to include those as we go. Post this live streaming. The recordings can be found on our website, but also on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. So please subscribe so you can join future events. And if you like what you hear, please leave a review. I'm pleased to welcome today Thomas Nägele, attorney at law at Nägele Attorneys in Liechtenstein. Thomas advises international finance, technology, and industrial enterprises operating in the fields of blockchain, DLT, telecommunications, internet, as well as public institutions, and we'll go into that much deeper. And as a Liechtenstein attorney and being a software developer, a unique sort of set of skills, he focuses on internet, IT law, as well as civil and corporate law. He was a member of the Blockchain Act working group. Thomas, welcome to METACO Talks today.
Seamus, thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Great. Well, it's been a very fast-paced start to 2021 in many senses. We look overseas. Look, we've got a brand new U.S. administration, a lot of regulatory leadership appointments switching over there. In Europe, obviously, there's a lot of things happening. In the crypto markets themselves, we've had new highs across cryptocurrencies, which have since seen percentage-wise large corrections. And despite the dominant narrative of late 2020 of institutionalization, as soon as the market's correct, it seems to bring out all the FUD and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt skeptics that say it's over. This is a criminal asset that will be banned. But I think whenever everyone needs their moment in the sunshine, but it seems that the institutionalization in no small part has been driven by regulation. And obviously, you've been very involved in that. And regulated firms are the on-ramps and off-ramps to financial markets, and they obviously can dramatically impact the adoption of crypto markets. So it's key development. You've been an active participant with legislators to bring these assets in the regulatory fold, and it'd be great to dive into that journey. And in Liechtenstein, how Liechtenstein's that legislation impacted EU and vice versa. Discuss the new EU regs and how you expect that to impact markets going forward. But before we start, many of our viewers may not be necessarily that familiar with Liechtenstein, so it'd be great if you could introduce the country, basically. Put it in context.
We have a 3 hours webinar now with all the topics we have to cover. We'll try our
exactly.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it makes sense that we just have a very short look at the situation of Liechtenstein, because it is crucial to understand where we are coming actually from. I will just give you a little bit of a background. Liechtenstein is a principality in the heart of Europe. So we are bordering actually Switzerland and Austria. It's a 30-minute car drive to Germany. So we are really in the center of Europe. As I said, it is a principality, so we have a prince, but we have a very strong, besides that, what is Liechtenstein always also famous for is the financial center. Given the size of 160 square kilometers, we have 15 banks, fund companies, 400 trust companies, which is compared or given the size quite a big industry in Liechtenstein. And yeah, we don't have any state debt. We have 21,000 commuters every day commuting to Liechtenstein, and as I said, 38,000 inhabitants approximately. Which is just to give you a little bit of an idea. I mean, yes, smaller countries are able to have regulation quite fast in comparison to big jurisdictions, that's for sure. I think what is really crucial and that you should understand why we will maybe later talk a little bit about the developments on a European Union level. Liechtenstein is a member of the European Economic Area. So we have access to the European Union single market through passporting, for example, when it comes to certain financial market services. But we also have to adopt legislation coming out of Europe. So it's a two-sided sword, if you want to call it that way. We also have special agreements with Switzerland. So it's really like this is the unique situation of Liechtenstein having access to Switzerland and the European Union. Yeah, I think if that makes sense.
I feel like booking a trip just looking at these pictures. Great. Thanks for the introduction. I mean, one of the reasons people have probably heard about Liechtenstein before this is, your country has been a pioneer in the regulation of crypto. It's set a great precedent for others to follow. Now, I think one of the questions is how involved have you been in helping shape that legislation? What have been the key legislations, and what do you see as the benefits to Liechtenstein?
So since 1st of January 2020, we have the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act in force in Liechtenstein. It's actually Token and Trusted Technology Service Providers Act is the right term of that legislation. And Liechtenstein started 2016 a work group to think about regulation in the cryptocurrency space and blockchain space, actually. And I was a member of that work group. And the first question actually the government asked is, do we need regulation? That were actually the corner where we're coming from, because in the end, you know, like with new developments, specifically when it comes to technology, in most cases, it might make sense to regulate it quite intensely in the beginning, because like we all know, it will hinder innovation. So the idea was to analyze and to think about if regulation is needed. And one of the solutions we saw in other jurisdictions, also in Europe, that they thought about, okay, there's this new development, we have to have additional legislation to provide investor protection rules, for example, or to expand them to these new developments as well. And we said, like, okay, if you analyze that technology a little bit in more detail, and if you do a deep dive, actually, you will understand, or you might come to the conclusion, and Liechtenstein did that it's much more. It's much more than just issuing cryptocurrencies or using cryptocurrencies for means of payment. As we all know, I think now, I think it's pretty clear that even like the big picture shows us that it is much more than just cryptocurrencies. Yeah. And so the Liechtenstein approach was actually to think about where this could actually end up. And the vision was to have a token economy. So to have a lot of assets which are at the moment not bankable, make them bankable, and provide actually the proper legal framework to make that happen. Because in quite a lot of cases, you see that the regulatory environment is not supporting actually the technological development. It's actually hindering, because if you transfer, and that was actually a very simple question, if you transfer a token, it's represented right to transfer it. And from a civil law perspective, it's just not the case in most cases, you know. And so you need this legal certainty. And that was actually the idea of that workgroup, to draft the legislation to support the vision of the tokenization of assets, to have that token economy flourish. And that was actually the background of that workgroup, and in the end, the idea behind the Blockchain Act.
Interesting. I mean, it begs the question, I think, to ask, how did you get into the crypto space to start with? Because obviously, from your profile, that you were a software developer and a lawyer, unusual set of skills, cross skills. So was it turning law into code that interested you?
Hopefully I'm a better lawyer than I'm a coder, because I'm a horrible coder. That is for sure. But I have a little bit of knowledge, and I did that almost 10 years. That is true. But I think, like, if others were talking about like me, and I heard that quite a lot of times, they refer to me in English as a tech person. I know the German word for that, but I think that's like the suitable term or a suitable description, because I love technology. I grew up with technology. I always tried to, I was more interested in setting up PCs and make computer games running than really play them. So I was always on the development side and the manufacturing construction side. So I was really interested in the technology all the time. And 2011, actually, when I was studying law in Vienna, I came across this new internet's money, and I said, that's really fascinating. But the technology fascinated me. I was not interested in the legal like questions around that. In 2013, I thought about writing a PhD, and for me, it was pretty clear that's the best topic you can ever think of. And that's a funny story, because I went to my former boss and I said, like, I want to write my PhD in that area. I just want to inform you, you know, like it will be something between technology law and financial market laws. And we're like, no, Thomas, don't do that. Write about something which you can actually earn money with, or which is of purpose, like write about foundation laws. And I said, yeah, but that's not what interests me. And I stick to that topic. And I mean, we all know, I think it was not the baddest idea.
Well, I think you've come into a very interesting space, so I imagine it's remained to be an exciting, stimulant topic to have started that journey down. You know, given the leadership position of Liechtenstein and the legislation there, things like the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act, as we said, has really been pioneering in terms of pioneering for the rest of the EU potentially. You know, we've got the MECA draft legislation out. How do you see that the Liechtenstein Act itself, or the policy regulations that have been put in place in Liechtenstein, have potentially impacted the MECA regulation? How do you expect the MECA regulation to impact what's already been legislated in Liechtenstein?
I think that's what we did as well. When we started to think about regulation, what you do in a space where there is no regulation, there is no experience, what you do is you look what others do. I think there is no bad piece of legislation in general. I mean, you can learn from every example. Because people were considering quite a lot of things. And if you look at the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act, it is a very comprehensive approach. It has quite a lot of things already covered. And we did presentations together in Brussels. Dr. Thomas Nägele from the government of Liechtenstein did a presentation there as well. And there were members of the European Commission also there. And it was in autumn, I think it was in October, that Joachim Schwerin from the European Commission was in Liechtenstein presenting the MECA, the draft of MECA, and he said that they analyzed the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act quite intense, and they thought that that's one of the better, when not the best example, actually, and if we analyze, like, what for example, the center of the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act is a legal definition of a token, and if you look at how MECA is constructed, it's also defining tokens, like different kind of crypto assets, and then around that, talking about services you can provide with, what are the requirements that you're able to provide that, and they have a clear distinction between the securities world and the non-securities world, which we exactly that's exactly the same with the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act. So therefore, yes, I think they had, and that's what they said, they had a close look at it, and I think some of the concept, at least in my point of view, and I'm very familiar with the Liechtenstein legislation, yes, you will find quite some ideas in the MECA regulation as well.
And do you think, having done that dive into MECA, do you think there's more the EU could do to help accelerate the adoption of digital assets? There's
always more you can do. Yeah. But if you put that into perspective, like, given the overall impacts this technology has, everybody in that bubble, and I think I consider myself to live in that bubble as well, because when I talk to anybody, even like in my private life, everybody wants to talk with me about, like, now, given the price at the moment, everybody's talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum again. Yeah. But like, you talk on a daily basis about that, and so yes, but in like on a global scale, it's just, it doesn't matter, to be very honest, and that a European Commission is actually proposing a draft for something which is not already, like, really important, is a very big thing. And yes, they can, sure, it has to evolve, sure, it has to be amended, pretty sure. I'm sure that's the beginning, it's not the end. But it is a very, very strong signal from the European Commission, and I think.
Yeah, what's your view based on that versus the rest of the world? Is this a space, what we've seen, let's say, the US is typically a leader in the technology, or is viewed often as a leader in the technology space. Is this a sector within the technology space that, given the forward actions of the legislators here, that Europe could potentially lead in?
Yes, and I hope they really follow that path, because I think now we have, like, with the situation we have now, we have everything what it would need that we can go on with leading that industry or that area. But we should not be afraid of going further. It's as we all know, there will be challenges, and there will be more and more challenges. Everybody who was entering that space some years ago lived with it on a daily basis with challenges, because there were more questions than answers, still are. There are more questions than answers with every aspect. But I think this is the moment for Europe, actually, to lead in an area where, and we all know, Europe, as you said, it's not Europe leading the technology part or the technology area. So this is really, and I think that's a big chance we have. And on the other hand, it will solve some of our problems as well, because I'm not an economist, but I was told that the way companies are getting funded in Europe is really different than it is in the US. In the US, you go to capital markets and you get your venture funded.
Precisely.
You know, in Europe, it's mostly banking. You know, banks are providing that funding, and the problem is that we all know that. Is this really
not working?
No.
No,
so
precisely.
This might be another, like, it will solve some of our problems. And as I said, for example, if you look at other jurisdictions, this is also a door opener also for legislation. Because if you think about what happens in Germany, and I'm not a German lawyer anyway, this is my private point of view, and it's not legal advice, disclaimer here. But if you look in Germany, like, they talked about amending their securities laws forever, you know, and now with this new blockchain hype, to call it that way, you know, it was possible, you know. Now they have dematerialized, they're thinking about dematerialization of securities. So it's really interesting that with that topic, you can actually make things happen. And I think we should, and I think we also have to cover the bad, or like the other side of the medal. Like, there is a lot of dark things about that, you know, but it's with everywhere, like with everything, it's the same, you know. But I think this technology is actually able to provide solutions where you can address these issues we have with money laundering, financing of terrorism, much better than anything else we have, you know. But we have to do it properly, and we have to have a balanced approach. And I think regulation is there one of the key factors. If we have a good regulation and a good regulatory environment, a good supervisory authorities in your jurisdiction and in Europe, you know, I think we will be able to provide solutions which are just more efficient, more beautiful than everywhere else, because we have the regulatory base for that, because you get legal certainty, which you don't get in other jurisdictions or areas, like, as you said, as you mentioned, some others. And I'm not focusing only, like, the US is one part. I mean, don't forget about the other part of the world, you know, like China is really catching up, or if they're not only already taken over.
Yeah, you've mentioned a lot to unpack there. I mean, I think there's no question, as you described, basically, Europe has issues that potentially will drive innovation, because, as you say, if it's all bank lending, the banks aren't lending, this is a potentially very innovative solution that can spur basically funding for small enterprise and really spur innovation broadly. At the same time, I think also the banks, having suffered as they have in Europe, you look at the market caps of European banks versus American banks, they're still largely in the doldrums, and they're looking for new business opportunities. So digital assets, what we see in our conversations is this is increasingly viewed as potentially a strategic offering going forward, and it could reinvent let's say, the banking stack. But as you mentioned, challenges come, and challenges are emerging fairly quickly. As soon as regulation started addressing basically digital assets, we have kind of the rise of DeFi, which potentially pushing even beyond what the regulators have been thinking about. How do you think that's going to impact things, and where does that go?
I think like, that's another very interesting area, and I think with DeFi, it's when I was the first time, but when I heard the first time the term DeFi, I was like, what's that? Like, is it another buzzword? Like, everybody was thinking about, like, let's have the ICO. After the ICO hype, we were supposed to have the SDO hype, which we all know it never happened. We could talk maybe a little bit about that, why this was the case. But decentralized finance is a very interesting concept as well. And I think I think what was happening is that they analyzed the technology, and if you understood what are really the advantages of the technology, it makes a lot of sense, because you then get rid of a lot of intermediaries, as we all know, just like at a level of cost. And also, it's not only about cost, it's about time. Like, you shouldn't have, like, these transactions are way more fast than ever, or could be. Like, it really depends how you implement it, you know. But on the other hand, like with DeFi, it was like the next heart attack for regulators. Like, what's that again? You see?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it is a constant journey. But in my point of view, I think, and that's actually with everything. Like, you talked about banks. Like, quite a lot of banks, they're doing projects, they have pilots internally. There's not a lot of public information about that, because for sure, I mean, they have to be very careful what products and services they're offering. But what we see as well is, like, Now I mean, they did their homework, you know, and I think it's we will see more and more products and services from banks where they make use of this technology, and actually that it makes a lot of sense for them to use the technology as well. And as you said, like they have a close look at the digital asset space, and yes, they will do baby steps, but sooner or later we will see the big steps, I think, there as well. And with DeFi, as I said, I mean, that's the next topic, you know, or that's actually the actual topic now. We will see what is next, you know. But this actually, I think, is one of the examples why I'm of the opinion that we are just at the beginning. And the financial sector was like the next, for sure, it was the obvious area to cover with these technologies. But there will be many, many more. So we're just at the beginning. And maybe the next hype is, I mean, you would kind of earn a lot of money with that, but digital certificates or whatever, or a global identity, you know, there are a lot of areas where you could use the technology.
Well, I think clearly if we tie global identity to digital assets, it's really completely changes what we know to a financial identity becomes something that's very universal and inclusive, basically, right? You know, stepping back in terms of, you know, the banks step into this space and regulators focused on, let's say, providing a safe way for, you know, regulation enables the banks to move. What do you think some of the positive impacts in terms of, let's say, market structure will be from regulation that has been lacking prior to the regulation?
I think that depending on what the service you wanted to provide with, it depends if it is possible based on the existing regulatory environment. Yeah. So one of the examples I always make is based on the existing regulatory environment, it was actually pretty easy to have security token offerings. So financial instruments offered in a tokenized way. We have the prospectus regime. We were even able to passport that to the European Union. That was pretty clear. Like the regulatory environment was actually fit for that. There was no. I mean, yes, it was like with everything. If you do that the first time, it's a challenge. But in the end, if you solve the issues, if you talk to a regulator and it's possible, then you know how, like, you pave the way and everybody else can follow. But for example, with the secondary market, it's a different piece. And talking about market infrastructures, it's actually interesting because if you think about the secondary market, so the trading part is actually something which is where DLT or these new technologies are maybe not the best solutions to provide the trading, but clearing and settlement is something which is actually perfectly done by this new technology. It's actually implemented in every of these technologies. Yeah. So you have but you have to differentiate between these two areas. And specifically talking about the settlement part, you have, like, if you look at the European, if the EU framework, you have to use a central securities depository. So if you think about that, you need to use a central securities depository, and on top of that, you have your blockchain layer. So like you have two systems doing actually the same job. You always have to synchronize them, and no CSD, I think, would ever provide services that like on a large scale, because it just doesn't make no sense to use both worlds. And and that's maybe one of the reasons, I think, why you still now you don't have a liquid secondary market for security tokens. You have some security tokens, you had some primary, you had some offerings already, but you don't have liquidity, you don't have secondary markets. And one of the big reasons, I think, is actually that this CSD problem was not actually solved. And because, yeah, there is this, and even like, for example, even if Liechtenstein wanted to solve that, because we are part of the European Economic Area, as I said, we cannot change that because that's harmonized financial market laws. So we don't have any room for maneuver there. So we need, anyway, a European Union approach. And with that MECA and DLT pilot regime, we have such an idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the tokenization's been, I think, something that's really spurred everyone's imagination about its potential, but it's been unfulfilled up to now, precisely because it's a chicken and egg thing. It's fantastic that you can tokenize, But if there's no secondary liquidity, why would you tokenize? I mean, you don't want to do it for the sake of the technology. It's typically issuers go where the liquidity is, and investors want assets that are liquid. So if there's no secondary market, it's a showstopper. So that would clearly be dramatic if we can address the secondary market, and it really would. Maybe we'll get back to those very bullish forecasts that we've seen from whether it's World Economic Forum about the future of tokenization may actually become a reality if this is a catalyst to enable the liquidity. Because there's a number of initiatives, whether it's Switzerland, I know in Switzerland or in Liechtenstein, there's been a lot of initiatives that have tried to start that market, but it's very hard to start it on your own. I think you need this sort of regulatory push to really get it going. As that becomes a reality, I think there's obviously been a lot of experiments in tokenizing securities, but to a large degree, the securities markets work fairly well. I mean, I think it's, at least most of us in the developed world wouldn't see much different, basically, right? What do you think for you, I think there's a lot of promise around, and you alluded to earlier, things like certificates, but what do you think tokenization can transform? What are the first candidates from, like, let's say, unbankable assets that can become bankable assets?
I think the projects we see so far and the ideas that we see so far is that you actually tokenize friction of ownership of physical objects, and that doesn't make any that might not make any sense for lower value objects. But think about a very precious piece of art, the Mona Lisa, for example. And yes, you can do that already. As we all know, you can set up a special purpose vehicle and then buy with that SPV, you buy that piece of art or whatever object. And in the end, you tokenize the security or you tokenize the shares again. So that's the structure we all know, and that's the structure we are familiar with. But that's, again, the concept of having an intermediary. You have a lot of overhead. You have a lot of additional costs. It's very inefficient. And what you could also do is that you have actually the ownership right of that piece of that object, and then actually let the token represent that ownership right. And for that, you need a proper legal framework, or not a proper. I mean, you need a legal framework where this is actually happening. And there we don't talk only about harmonized or financial market laws. We also talk about civil law. So that's why, for example, in the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act, we had to amend our Corporate Act, we had to amend our property, or we had actually to think about amending our property law, and then ended up with doing it in a different way. And have now our own way of disposal of a token, and that this will actually lead to the disposal of the represented right. So this is like a lot of legal work, but without that, you don't get any legal certainty. So imagine if I will tell you, Seamus, it's download that app. I can peer-to-peer. I can transfer you 1/10 of my very precious piece of art in my background, and then we'll say, yeah, that's fine, let's do that, And in the end, you will come to court because you will tell Thomas, I bought the other 90% now, I have 100%, please hand over that piece of art. And then it will come to me because you think that I have the piece of art in my office, and I will tell you, from a civil law perspective, you never ever actually were the owner of that piece of art. You might have a claim, but I'm bankrupt, so feel free to sue me, but I don't have any money, and this is not my piece of art, it's actually from my wife, and you get the point. There will be no transactions, or people will not trust this way of transferring assets when you don't get any legal certainty. You have to be able to sue people. You have to even, we all know that it's not supposed that you should use a court again to get to your rights, but if something goes wrong, and if something in the real world goes wrong, yes, you have to be able to go to a court, convince a judge of your rights, and then you should be able to use the power of jurisdiction to get to your right. And you need legal certainty there. Yes, there's actually another solution. What you could do, you could just say, we already have in our existing legal framework sufficient legal grounds to do that, and then we'll just let the court decide, But this is okay, hoping that, and as a lawyer, I have a lot of trust in our courts, they will do that, but it will take years. It will take years to have a legally binding final decision from a court. So it's just like you're using fast track if you do it the other way around and say like, let's have a legal framework covering most of the issues, you know, and then you get the legal certainty you need to make that happen. And the concept of the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act is actually that a token is legally defined and is able to represent rights. So whatever rights. It's not only, as we said, your shareholder rights or your voting rights. It's also possible to represent your ownership rights or your rights, for example, if you have IP or intellectual property, it can represent these rights as well. And that's the interesting concept because it's very, very flexible on the one hand, you know, and on the other hand, it provides legal certainty. So it's and that's the basic concept of it. And you need this, you need quite a lot of rules to think about how you can make that happen. And I mean, we started 1st of January 2020, and we all know like, it's not the end, like it's not the final version. We will like the courts will have to address a lot of questions and a lot of challenges. So it's the beginning, but I think it's a very good first step into the right direction. And with MECA, like it's the next big thing on a European Union level, because that's what people are asking us, or the Liechtenstein government specifically. They're like, it's interesting to have such a piece of legislation in Liechtenstein, but it's only applicable in Liechtenstein, you know? So what's the point? But you have to have at least one good example. Hopefully it's a good example. We don't know that actually, but that others can think about the same as well, you know? And the interesting part is, and think of that you're able to address a 400 million plus market, the European Union market. And that's what actually MECA is proposing, you know? You have passportable products and services through the European Union. And that's interesting.
That's impactful, no question. I mean, you've raised an issue, which, and we run out of time, so I'll just ask one last question, but you've raised this issue about, that I often think about, you know, and I think you as a software developer, you know, as a former software developer, yeah, and a lawyer, how far can we codify the legal framework into a smart? How far do you think we can codify the legal framework into a smart contract? And you know, is there a world where you can get rid of the courts and it, you know, governed by rules that are absolute? I mean, and is this a, you know, no interpretation, no opinion? And is this a utopic or a dystopic future? You know, where does it go?
Never say no. I mean, we don't know if there will be a solution, but these concepts are actually very, very old. Even like the big codifications of law, they already had the idea to the next codification should be drafted in a way where you don't need any courts again. Everybody can read the provision, everybody can understand the provision, and there is no room for argument. It's pretty clear. If this, then that, speaking as a coder. But it's not that simple. Because like you can actually think of a ton of problems and address them with whatever framework you have. And think about coming back to the coding part. Yes, you can think about most of the cases, but we all know that there were hacks. You have like flaws in your code. You have like security problems. And what's then? I mean, in the end, you know, I would love to, and speaking as a lawyer, I mean, that's disrupting my daytime work actually. But I would love to have a solution where everything is automated, you know, because then we can focus on other things, like maybe we are bored and then we have to go more hiking or whatever. But seriously, I mean, but this will not happen tomorrow, you know, because, and we already had this, like, think about the DAO hack, you know, like we already have these experiences. Like, it's not code is law. That's just not the case. But I think, and that's speaking, and as now as an advocate of smart contracts, but it makes a lot of sense to have standardized contracts, you know, where like most of it is really standardized. And there are these contracts where, yeah, there is not a lot of room for argument, you know, and then you can automate them. And therefore, I think, yes, we will see that smart contracts will actually allow the way, because think of that, if you have a smart contract and it will do what it is supposed to do, and it's auto-enforced in a way, you know, the other party already have the money. So you always have to go to the other party and sue the other party, you know. But if it's not auto-executed and you will not pay, you know, it's easier to say, I will just not pay, and the other party has to wait, you know. So the idea of suing another party in the other jurisdiction is way harder than getting sued. And therefore, I think just only because of that, for example, I think that smart contracts smart contracts in a way where you have a lot of the challenges which might arise of this transaction already covered will lead to less, hopefully, court decisions in that area. But it is a long journey, I think. We are like, just one story. I had once a presentation, I think it was 2018 or something, in front of 100 lawyers. And the topic was, are smart contracts legally binding? And like for the first 15 minutes, I had to convince my fellow colleagues that yes, they are of another opinion, that smart contracts are neither smart nor they are contracts. Right. That's fine. And at least I got the topic. But I said, like, you can take it as it is, or you can think about whatever it is. I don't care. But in the end, that's just how the industry is calling it. It's smart contract. And think about the concept, and it's really valuable. And we argumented about 10 minutes if the topic, if the title of my presentation is okay, you know, and if they can live with it. So you see, like, lawyers are like, no, don't talk about that. Like, it's really not, now we are at the core of our business, you know. And me in person, you know, I always tell people, and specifically lawyers, go to there are all of these websites where you can check if your job is actually in danger because of whatever automated robot advice and coding things like, and just have a look and think about that. You know, this will happen anyway. You cannot do anything about it, and therefore I think you should, think about that. And I mean, I love to not to do like repetitive tasks every day, like using the same template, to changing the parties and then issuing the bill. That's not something where what I go to office for. You know, I want to build new things. I want to really address challenges. Sorry, but that's like smart contract is something I love to talk about lawyers, and I can talk about for hours about that. But sorry.
I'm sure it's a topic a lot of people have opinions on, so it's an interesting one. Listen, Thomas, it's been really interesting, and I'm sorry we're out of time, but I would love to have you on again because I think there's a lot to unpack, and I think the whole concept of regulation is just going to become a bigger and bigger issue, and more to dive into. So, thanks, and I think maybe if you could just say, how can people, you know, reach out and connect with you?
The easiest way is via email. It's my email is tn@nägele.law. You can find it on our website. You can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and whatever social media. It's pretty easy. If you Google Thomas Nägele, you will find me. And I'm happy to answer questions. I will answer. It will take time, but I will answer.
Well, Thomas, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
So the next METACO Talks will be on February 5th at 10:30 with Francisco Fernandez. He is the founder of the core banking software provider Avaloq that has recently been acquired by NEC. He was a pioneer visionary that early on saw the strategic value of digital assets. And I think it will be a very exciting talk, one you won't want to miss. So until then, see you next time. Thanks for joining.